audio from here. All right, so media management. The book you guys have is a little bit older. It's still a good book, and there are a lot of solid principles, and just frankly, nobody's updated a better book. But there are some updates that may help with media management. But first, kind of a little bit of a devotional start. This is from Romans chapter 5, and this is right after Paul was telling a story about how Abraham didn't give up. And even when he was 100 years old, he was like, I believe God is going to give me a child, and I will stay steadfast. And anyway, I think it loosely ties into media management, and don't give up before you've transferred your files. That's a stretch. But I was like, I try to dig up something that relates. This is a lot more about being steadfast in faith. But will somebody read these verses?
Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him we have also obtained access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and we rejoice in hope of the glory of God. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Romans 5:5.
Any thoughts? Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Endurance is, I think, a lifelong theme. It's necessary and difficult all at the same time.
Endurance is a lifelong theme. Yes. I would definitely agree with that, especially in this industry. Slight diversion from biblical themes, but who's seen Wicked, the film? Okay, a couple of you. Who's seen the Broadway show? Okay. So this is just an example within our industry, right? So we have The Wizard of Oz, which was written in 1900. Then there were actually 3 films made of it. The first one was like a 12-minute silent film in the early 19 teens, I think. Then there was a full feature-length silent film, complete with like the cue cards of the speech, the dialogue, and then the film that we all know from the 1930s. Then in 1990, I think was the year, that the books, the Wicked Tales of the West, were written, and those are pretty twisted, but somebody took inspiration from those to make a Broadway show that came out in, I think it was 2004, was when the Broadway show was released. Universal Pictures signed a development agreement in 2005, and it took until 2024 for part 1 of the film to get released. Sometimes things take a long time, and now it's like by far the top grossing Broadway musical adaptation feature film ever in all history, and it's, at the top of the charts, making a ton of money, and it will launch them into the second one. And whether you like it or not, it's just a statement to how much we have to endure sometimes. And films can take a long time to make. Animation takes a long time to make. Visual effects take a long time to do. Sound design does. Brendan.
If you want another example, look at the Finance of Freddy's movie. That thing was in development hell for 7+ years? Like, we didn't even know if it was happening for most
7 years. Yeah, that's not I don't know that one in particular, its story, but 7+ years is not unusual. A fast track development film, you're like ready to make a film in 3 years. So it takes a while. So I just thought this ties in a little bit to the end of the shoot day, when you just want to be done and go home and sleep, but the files have to get transferred. And do you get lazy? So don't keep going. Have the character to transfer the files. That was my loose tie-in, but I think it's worth talking about endurance in our faith and in all the things we do. So I know it's kind of a loose biblical tie-in, but I like to bring in scripture whenever we can. Any other thoughts on this? Just keep going. Abraham was 100 before his breakthrough. Yeah, Victoria.
Rejoice in our sufferings. So I think it's good to not forget to have fun, even when it doesn't seem like it, because everything pays off the time. But sometimes we get too frustrated or too stressed and forget to actually have fun. Because we do this because we love it. We
Yeah.
don't want pigs film to make money.
Yes, please. If you're here because you think this is the fast track to a lot of money, leave. If you're here because you love it, stay. Get a different major if you think this is an easy way to make a living. And you can make a lot of money, but it's hard and it's rare. You can make a decent living for sure, but it's not. Go be a lawyer. Go be a doctor. Leave this room. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Have fun with this. Don't forget we love it. I love that. Thank you. All right, so with our endurance race of the day, how many copies do you need of your footage? Yeah, 3 minimum is the goal. That minimum. A lot of things end up with a whole lot more than 3. But this is kind of the process. And the book goes through this, but I wanted to boil down the most important things from the book with making sure you have your copies. So your workflow on set, you're recording to camera and sound, sometimes on the same unit, right? Single system is everything is going to one recorder, usually the camera. Dual system is a sound mixer recorder and camera. But dual recorded device whenever possible. If the camera has 2 cards that can record at the same time, record at the same time. The cameras that I shoot on a lot dual record. And it's a handful of times that there's been a card error on one and not the other, but those handful of times we would have lost the footage, right? So maybe once a month on a typical shooting daily, it would happen, but it's worth it. The sound devices mixers you guys will use can back up. Basically, it's an immediate copy from the SD card to a USB drive. So you have to wait a minute. So that doesn't always get done because sometimes your takes are too fast, which is an unfortunate downside with the design of the Mix Pre series, in my opinion. I use a different sound devices mixer personally where I can dual record and truly dual record. So I'm recording to a compact flash and an SD card at the same time. I feel much better with that. But label your cards because you need to do something physical on the card so people know if there's data on it. My system is we have 2 boxes, the transfer box and the clear box. Right? So when you're done with the card, it goes in the transfer box and there are slots and labeled A, B, C, D, GoPro, and sound. And I've got little things to stick on the cards for what they are. And then that seals up and it's waterproof. Then after cards are transferred and verified, they go into the clear box. So like I have nothing in transfer box right now because all my cards are transferred and my clear box has a lot of memory cards. Just a simple system, and like these boxes are, I don't know, I think they were like $10 each on Amazon. I'll pass these around if you guys want to look at these. I know Curtis in the equipment office bought these too. I like ones that have foam so they're not putting pressure on the cards. Downside is like micro SD cards can fall in these slots. That's why I just use the little holders, but if you guys want to look at those, that's a simple system. You can also just use individual card holders and mark them. Just do something. Then make 2 copies before the cards are formatted. So 2 different hard drives get a copy, so you absolutely have a minimum of 2 copies. And verify you actually have the data. Offshoot is what I use, not offshot. I'll fix that. Offshoot, which is a transfer system. So if you're dragging and dropping and you drag and drop to 2 different hard drives, it slows your computer down, right? If you use one of the softwares like Offshoot or ShotPut Pro, those are the 2 industry standard ones, it doesn't slow down the process and it will verify the data transfer for you. If you are doing manual dragging and dropping, and you drag and drop to one hard drive, wait, drag and drop to the next one, you need to verify the data amounts and make sure it actually copied everything. You got a story, right?
Yeah, I had a really lengthy game session that happened, and it was absolutely destroying my regular computer drive. So I dragged it into a folder I made on my other drive, and I saw it transfer, and I didn't even think to check it, and then I deleted it. And then I go back and look for it, nothing was there.
Yeah.
All that's completely gone. I was just like, oh no.
Yeah. So you always check the file size, and look and listen to the footage. Part of that is, like, I have done this before where I accidentally transferred. I was doing an interview with 2 cameras, and instead of transferring both cameras, I actually transferred the second camera, one camera twice, and transferred it as both A and B cam. And I was lazy, and I skipped looking and verifying the footage, but the file sizes matched up, right, for the card I just transferred. They were just identical. So luckily, the camera that I did transfer, I was recording single system audio to one camera. Luckily, I transferred the one with the good audio and not just the extra camera, and I could just zoom in to cut. Anyway, don't always look and listen and make sure that it actually works. Don't just rely on looking at the data. Any questions about that? Any other horror stories? Just do it. If you have enough cards, don't format the cards until you can do your nighttime backup transfer. Try to not have to put cards back into circulation same day. This doesn't sound, it's very rare that this is a problem because sound files are so much smaller, but camera, this happens a lot, that you don't have enough and you're rotating through cards. And that's a really scary time when you only have the copies of footage on set. Because even if nothing goes wrong with the computer, what if somebody walks on set and steals your hard drives? You know, like, things happen, unfortunately, and then all your footage is gone if you've put the cards back in circulation. So try to not format cards until a backup's been made. And this is also part of just try not to roll more on camera than you need. Run a tight call so that it's very quickly from camera speed to marking it to rolling. That's why when we do roll call with an assistant director, it's sound ready, camera ready, sound speed, camera speed, then marking it, because the sound files are cheaper in terms of storage. So have sound run longer. Camera last minute, especially if you're shooting on film and you've got a canister of film you're actually exposing, you are ready to go. I've only shot one film on actual film, and we only had like 12 minutes and we were doing a short film. And man, everybody's on your A game when you know you're going to be out of storage in 12 minutes. So, yeah, just try to not run excessive amounts of camera roll, because that takes time in your data transfers. It takes time in your backup and at storage. And then you're more likely to have to rotate cards. Any other thoughts or questions on this? All right. So then overnight, don't have one person take both drives home. Because again, car accidents happen, things happen. It's sad, we don't want it to, but it does. Don't put both hard drives with the same person. I have worked with people who don't practice this before, and when I hand the producer a hard drive, he's like, "Why are you handing this to me? I'm not the editor." I'm like, "No, I'm not taking both drives home with me to my hotel room. No, you take one, I take one. We do not both take them." Then you back up overnight to another storage system. That way you don't have all of your information plugged in at the same time. So if the computer crashes and drives corrupt, you don't lose it, right? And then you keep that backup offset of all the footage. So you know that the next day you have, as you're continuing to fill up your hard drives, if you're using the same hard drives, which most shoots do, you're safe. You still have it there. That's that third backup. Ideally, you actually have 2 of those remote backups. That's why 3 is minimum. But that way, whatever you shot the day before is safe. Even if your sound, the card could probably hold the entire shoot. Don't do it. End of day, do a transfer. Because if something happens, you would lose all the sound. Then you go back the next day, after the copies are verified. Okay, I have cards now that are clear, and then I will hand them back out to the people who need them. And let them know this is ready to format. So you always want to physically mark it and also just verbally verify. Don't just leave it in a box and assume somebody's going to know, okay, this is the transferred box, you can have it now. Hand it off. Whoever's doing data management, hand it to the camera and sound people and say, you may have these cards now. Go forth and film new stuff. Even though they're ready to format, always format them in the camera or sound recorder, because they do their own setups on the cards, let them build their architecture. Don't format a card in a computer and hand it off. And again, yeah, use that physical indication of card status because they all look the same, right? So do something on the card or the case so people know. Any questions or thoughts? It's not complicated. It just must be done. Don't skip these steps. It's not worth it. You've worked really hard to shoot all this footage. Don't leave it to the end. So long-term and in post-production, still make sure there are 2 copies in 2 different places. Don't forget to back up your post-work. Back up your audition sessions, back up your Premiere, DaVinci, whatever you're using. Don't just leave it to the auto saves because those are still in the same location, right? So you want to nightly at least back up whatever work you've done to something else. That might be Google Drive or Dropbox, so that it's easy to be backing up constantly. But don't just assume your computer will never crash. Computers crash, hard drives fail, plan on it. Don't say, I never thought it would happen to me, because it will. It just hasn't happened yet. These things are not perfect. It's technology that breaks. Then for long-term storage, tape storage is what gets used, and data actually gets converted to tapes in the real world and in big productions. Tape storage systems are expensive. RAID storage systems get used a lot, where there are multiple hard drives blending together. Network attached storage is what it's normally called, and you hook it up to your network, or you have a RAID system that you can plug into your computer. We have, I think, 120 terabytes on our NAS, and I'm actually in trouble with my editor right now because I threw some personal files on as a temporary backup, and he's out of space for working, and I have to fix it. But that's for my company. We're at 120 terabytes on our NAS, and then we may expand it. Most of you guys probably won't have that much storage right now. And then, I mean, cloud backups, hard drives, those are all options. I've got bare hard drives that we do another backup of everything on. So everything on that network attached storage device is backed up also to individual hard drives. And we have a Google spreadsheet that says where the backups are. And those hard drives, which just for expense are literally bare computer hard drives, and I have a dock to put them in, those are all stored at a third location. So we have stuff in different places, and all of our exports are also backed up on the cloud. One thing I would just recommend, I didn't put this in the spreadsheet, but just thought of this, when you guys start working for clients, because a lot of you will be freelancers who will do work for somebody, you're going to shoot somebody's wedding video, you're going to shoot their talk on tape, you're going to make a commercial for them. Don't take on responsibility of file storage yourself. When the project is done, you hand off the source files per a contract, and then it's their responsibility to maintain them. If they want you to edit something later, they bring you back the drive. Don't become a library for your clients. I speak from experience that there is a lot of stuff on that storage from when I didn't put that in contracts that I wish we did not have to keep storing. And don't leave it to them of like, if you want a backup, you have to provide a hard drive. Just put it in. You're not backing it up. Either put it in their contract that like this is the price and it includes the cost of that storage. Just don't give them the option. It really becomes super annoying in freelance world because then they do expect you to keep it forever. And they'll come back to you 5 years later with, can you change this one shot or something? And that's great, but they need to hire you for that new work and bring you the hard drive where they've stored it. Any questions or thoughts? Okay. Something I wish somebody had told me a long time ago. On media cards, don't cheap out. These, yeah, I mean, these cards are, I think they were $200 new. These ones, the pro grades, it's not worth it. How much are you shooting, right? These are probably a little excessive from the person who got these, yeah.
I usually go with the SanDisk Extreme Pro because it's like at least for me, like it's more pricey than an extremely cheap one, but it's extremely durable in comparison.
Yeah. I haven't had any problems with SanDisk Extreme Pro, but don't get like the Walmart special card. It's not worth it. Yeah.
So is there like a practical
and like reliable way to get stuff like that secondhand that's still in good shape, like good quality stuff? Are there people who are like, hey, I'm trying to get rid of this stuff?
Yeah.
Like, and where would I go for that?
B&H and Adorama are two of the top ones for reselling used gear. Honestly, eBay is good too. You just make sure they accept returns and then you check the gear as soon as you get it. Like I sold a bunch of memory cards on eBay and sold a bunch of gear on eBay when we were like, and this is also a common practice. If a production company does buy a lot of gear, when they're between productions, you sell what you don't need immediately because otherwise you're just paying taxes on it and it's getting older. So if it cost less to buy it than it would have to rent it for the duration of your shoot, you buy it, then you sell off what you're not going to use regularly. So like we sold 3 out of 5 cameras and kept 2 and sold a whole bunch of memory cards and a bunch of other stuff. But, you know, but yes, getting used gear is a great way, and even memory cards.
What was
Yeah.
the second website you mentioned?
Adorama.
Okay.
So
How
be
do you
it
spell-
Adorama,
Okay.
I think is
Okay.
it? Adorama.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yep, and both of those buy used gear and they check it before they sell it, and then it comes with a warranty. So if you're skittish of buying used gear, either of those, you're pretty safe. And absolutely a good idea. Check your speeds and specs for your recording devices. This happens more with cameras than with sound, that the cards can't actually write fast enough to get all the data, but the manufacturers will recommend cards and they'll give specs. So I put in like the Zoom Essentials link. Everybody has one of these are our recommended cards that we have tested, and it's just device per device, and they constantly are updating them. And they will definitely release like this is what the minimum speeds to write to the card are. And again, dual record if possible, because even the best cards can break. You can drop it and accidentally step on it, and it's not the card's fault. Like, just don't risk it if you don't have to. Okay. So moving on from media into a little bit of what the chapter got into with cables and connectors. These things are going to kind of just keep building conceptually through the semester, but just the difference between analog and digital signal and what travels over a cable, right? An analog signal is, you know, you guys know the cups and the rope, right? It really is just a wave traveling along the wire, right? So it's pressure variation represented as analog voltage. It's just up or down, big signal, small signal kind of thing. And then if it's digital, it's been converted into 0 and 1s from those samples, right? So you have the samples at the top and the bottom, right? Our sample rate has to be twice what the frequency is we're recording. So that's the big difference, analog versus digital. Now, balanced versus unbalanced. An unbalanced signal is just one signal. A balanced is 2 signals. So it has 2 signals that actually are out of phase. They would cancel each other out because when one is at the top, one's at the bottom. So if you played both of those at the same time, you'd hear 0 noise. It would just be silent because they've canceled the waveforms out. And then there's usually a grounding wire too. When they get to the signal, they combine them back. And what happens in balanced signal is basically it analyzes what wasn't part of the signal. Okay, that's interference, and gets rid of it. That's why they're so much more stable. What's important for you guys to know on film sets is XLR cables are balanced. They do better near electrical cables because electrical cables create magnetic fields. And if you put something like an unbalanced signal, like a guitar cable, near a electrical cable, it can create interference. Yeah.
Also, wireless transferring can get a lot of interference too.
We'll get into the issues with wireless and with, yes, interference when we get into lavs. But yeah, that can create interference too. And a lot of times you have your receiver closer to the transmitter for wireless, so it doesn't have as far to go, and then you run a balanced cable to your recorder even if you can't be there. So when there's an XLR, you've got a hot signal, a cold signal, a ground wire. If you ever have to repair cables, you will look up a diagram and reference this. You don't need to memorize which one is which. Just know that that's the way it works. And then on quarter-inch cables or any of the phono plug styles. The tip is usually the hot signal. Then there's those 2 rings, and that's how you know if it's balanced, if it has 2 rings instead of 1, if it's for a mono signal. The ring is the cold signal, and then the sleeve is the ground. If that was a stereo cable, it would be unbalanced, and the tip, I think, is usually left. The ring is usually the right channel. So the important thing is try to use balanced cables, and XLR cables are balanced cables. That's the big takeaway for production sound. Any other questions on that? All right, and I threw just some images. We're not going to go over all of these, but of common connectors so that you can kind of get a feel for what these look like. Firewire does not get used much anymore. The ones you're most likely to use are XLR and TS or TRS and RCA for audio. And then they're all the different USBs. This really just is, I wanted to give you guys an image to make the book make sense. We're not really going to go over this in depth because this is something you would reference when you need to know it. XLR is the big one that we use all the time in sound on set. Then another chart of just analog or digital and balanced or unbalanced. XLR actually can run digital audio, but it very rarely does. XLR is usually, it goes from your microphone to your sound recorder, and the sound recorder converts it to digital. So just a few of those for reference. Okay, other thing covered in the chapter were mismatch problems. These first 3 the chapter didn't cover in this chapter, but it was referenced earlier, and it's something that's really important. If you have your power needs mismatched, like if your microphone needs phantom power and you don't have phantom power being sent to it, which is where power is actually sent over the cable to the microphone, it won't work, right? And if it didn't need phantom power and you send phantom power, you can break it. So the big example for this is our lav microphones. The receiver that plugs into your sound mixer does not need phantom power. And you can potentially break the microphone if you're sending phantom power. So you want to turn off the power going from the mixer to the microphone if you're using those. The little lav mics do need phantom power, but it's getting sent from that transmitter for the microphone. And then line and mic level. Line is kind of the consumer audio level, which is way louder than mic level. I don't remember the exact numbers. But if you ever don't know, just start with assuming something. Go with like your safest bet, right? So if you're sending a signal, tell your receiving device line level and you don't hear anything, okay, switch to mic level. That way you're less likely to break anything. Because the dangers are you can blow out a speaker if something was, like if the speaker was intended for mic level or whatever the devices you run through, you can blow it out by it being too loud. You guys ever heard this happen where somebody plugs something in and then it's super loud? Yeah. That's usually the problem. You also should turn off your amplifiers before you plug anything in, then turn them on after stuff is plugged in. That helps too. And then you do the reverse when you're unplugging. You turn off your amplifiers, then you unplug. It's more of a stage sound thing than in production sound, but that helps prevent a lot of breakages. The other things that were covered in this chapter were if your sample rate is different, and the big one is the 44.1 that gets used for CD audio for music, versus 48 that gets used for film usually. If those don't match, you can have problems. If your bit depth is different, you can have some problems. Frame rate can cause drift. If you told your sound recorder, hey, we're recording 30 frames per second, but the camera was recording 24 frames, it can cause drift in post, where you sunk it up at the beginning and it goes out of sync as time goes on. Most computers just handle that automatically now and do the conversions. Your problem is you can, how many of us multitask on our computers, right? And you can get your computer exhausted and it can't handle anymore. And even just all the processes that go into video or audio editing are a lot on their own. Don't make the computer have to do extra conversions. And file type if your file types are different. So the drift out of sync, when the sample rate is different and it's trying to make it work, sometimes you get these like little noises. They're like, it almost feels like an artifact noise or like so that's why we call them nits. or it might be a little blip. And this still happens. It doesn't happen often. Most computers can keep up with things. But usually if you're hearing those, it's because you're trying to mix two different files in the same session, one that was CD audio at 44.1, and then stuff that was production sound at like 48. And your computer might just slow down. So your solutions are try to keep everything matching from the beginning. But sometimes you can't do that, especially if you're putting in, music that was recorded at CD norms. Convert it first before you put it in your session. That's really the easy solution. And you always keep the original. Sometimes you're pretty much now using the new file. If you were doing this with video because you had a bunch of stuff at different frame rates, you might be using proxies. And then always keep the original in case something screws up in the conversion. You guys have any experiences where you've had those problems happen when you throw a bunch of stuff at a computer that doesn't match? Okay, Brendan has. Anybody else, have you experienced that yet? This happens a lot in like reality TV world where it's like, ooh, who had an iPhone that recorded this thing? All right, and then there was a GoPro, and then there was like the security camera, right? Like, because you get whatever footage you can. So part of the assistant editor's job is to convert everything. Yeah, Brett.
Yeah, mine happened when, actually this has been a recent battle. I keep having to remind myself to change the frame rate in Blender, because at typical it's at 30 frames a second but for rendering out, but we shot at 23 and a bunch of decibels, so every time I accidentally render it out, it takes hours, and then I go try and sync up the footage, and then I'm like, wait, no, did I do, oh.
Yep. And it's usually the middle of the night when those problems hit, and you're like, why? So when you're awake, fix it from the beginning. Yeah, and just we'll keep covering sync things. That, your main ways to sync, this was covered in this chapter again, the clapper slate, you slate every time, that's both for information and for sync. Make sure everything is recording before you slate. If you have two cameras recording, try to only slate once and slate for both of them if they can both see the slate. It makes it way easier in post. You would just say A and B mark instead of just A mark. And then if you have to do second sticks because the cameras couldn't both see it, you'd say second sticks and then do B camera. The next way is waveform sync, which is what most of us use as our go-to now, is we just dump it all in and say sync by waveform and let Premiere do the work, and it analyzes the waveform. But for that to work, everything has to be recording sound. So you need to make sure your cameras are also recording a scratch track. Otherwise, it can't analyze it. And then timecode is the best way, because then it's truly locked and it's much faster on the computer because it's just reading the zeros and ones to see when is the time in sync. For that to work, you have to have your devices all set to free run for your timecode mode. Best way is to use Tentacle or Locket boxes. We have Tentacles in the equipment office that nobody uses. I will be training you guys on those this semester. But we have 2 sets of Locket boxes so that you can make sure your sound and video are exactly in sync all the time. We've got them. People aren't using them. So we'll train on those this semester. Those are the most popular ones right now because they work and they're cheap. You can also get a lot of those good deals used. And then if you don't have those, you just jam every few hours. Most devices you would use a cable. We actually can't do that here because we actually don't have, the Mix Pre 6s don't have output for cable. And we don't have the right cable adapters to go from the cameras to those, working on that. But you can manually sync with just reading out the numbers and have everybody set them to get close. I always try to do all 3 of these because inevitably something fails. I like to never sync by slate, but I always want the data from the slate. I always try to waveform sync or timecode sync. And if I wasn't able to jam sync timecode, I'll do waveform first, but then the timecode, if something's screwy and I can't figure it out, I can always say sync by timecode and figure stuff out. Yeah.
What does jam every few hours mean?
It means you hook a cable up between the devices and say, make the timecode match.
Okay.
Oh.
And if you don't have a cable, you would just read off, one person will count out like 29, 30, 31, 32 reading off their screen, and the other person's waiting to get to like 40 to press jam.
Okay.
So that they are very close. So great, thank you for, sometimes I forget what terms are known and what aren't. Yes, so you literally jam them together, make them the same. So, and timecode goes over a BNC or a DCI cable. They look exactly the same, but it's like a cable that you hook up. What's fun is a lot of different cameras and mixing devices have like adapters you have to use to actually connect to their device. And those are unique per device, some of them. But SDI, sorry, not DCI, SDI, BNC cables, they look like the cable hookups. All right, good questions. Okay, that's what I had for kind of lecture stuff, couple announcements, and then we'll dive into that audition chapter. And you guys can start working on it on the one I have a video up for. Just a friendly reminder, and I actually changed up the rubric on participation. Videos that are put as mandatory are part of participation. We do not have time to cover every lecture in this class, and as we start getting into production sound, where you guys will be touching stuff, the videos are really important to watch before class because I want you spending all the time with your hands on gear, not me doing a demonstration. So that your participation grade includes watching those videos. The way you know if it's a required video, other than the fact that I'll write it in Canvas, is if it's put through Canvas directly, it's required. If it's a link to YouTube, it's not. It's optional. Because I can see the ones straight through Canvas who watched them and who didn't. And I can see how long you watched them too. I don't care. The ones that I don't care about, I'm not going to use up all my Canvas storage space. I just throw those on YouTube, and you guys, like the audition ones. You can watch it if it helps you. If you don't need it, I don't care. Cool? So, sorry, not scene 7 is coming up next. Scene 9 is coming up next. I'm going to record that this afternoon, so you guys will have the chapter 9 one, but the chapter 3 one is up now, so you guys can watch that, and that's linked in Canvas. So you can do that while you do your assignment. Next guest speaker in the producing class is going to be my friend Curtis Boggs, who is going to come talk about pitching. He will be there this Wednesday at 1:15 in Screening Room A. If any of you guys would like to join for that, you are welcome. And homework reminders, your quiz is due before 2B, so that's before the next class this week, right? And it covers this lecture and the chapter, and a little bit on audition, not so much on audition. We're really going to be getting heavy into audition and quizzes with audition next week. I kind of was slow on those because of activations and help desk stuff and all that to make sure that everybody can actually study the material before quizzes, but they'll be very audition focused starting next week. Your midterm project plan is due Friday, and that if I haven't given you something and you don't have something, that may literally be, I still need a project, I don't have one. That's okay. The point is for me to make sure it gets fixed. I'm getting with Professor Tillett on getting all the old endowed films that don't have good sound mix, so that hopefully we can take some of those films and use those for anyone who doesn't have an assignment. So he's got some hard drives in his office. Yeah.
Where can we find the lecture videos?
In Canvas.
Okay.
So I put them in the week. Yep. Under modules. I'll show you that in a second. I got to switch up the screen view so I can show them. Yeah.
I am planning on having a film assignment for my cinematography class, but we're not sure when that's actually going to come together. So I don't have like a guaranteed project.
I would plan on that for your final then.
Okay.
Because, and that's kind of why you guys have 2 projects. This first one, you really have to use something already done, right? But the second project, everybody should have something done from cinematography or fundamentals of production or producing. Like I actually stacked the deadlines for producing so that it fits really well with this class for when you need to be on set doing a sound assignment and then when you need to do a post assignment. And Professor Buffalo and I also stacked the senior project deadlines. So they should have picture lock on senior projects before you guys need post sound mixing for your finals. But the first assignment really is, it's got to be done now. Like if you haven't shot it yet, it's not for your midterm.
Yeah.
It's got to be finished. So that's why I'm hoping the endowed films we can split up because some of them were great, but the sound never got finished well. So, but if you have a personal project that you've always wanted to finish the sound on, I would rather you use that.
Do you want us to reach out to you if we want to do one of the endowed film things, or are you just going to assign it to us?
Please go ahead and fill out that form and say, please send me an endowed film. I want to work on this.
Is that in the module?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop this slideshow and I'll go and show you guys some of these things in modules now.